Out of those 118 years, it has consistently rained the last week of October for 87 of those years. This is now 88, less than 87 that it hasn't rained. So we didn't have any rain this year. But during the Civil War, it was coming down pretty heavy. So that day was overcast, but it was cloudy. It started to warm up, but it certainly isn't what we're experiencing. So those are the conditions that the artillerists had to deal with. And I say that because we're dealing with black powder. And if you know anything, if you ever shot fireworks on the 4th of July, you know dampness and black powder and fuses don't go together. So he agrees. I agree there, horse. So obviously the powder had to be kept dry all the time. And these two carts that you see here behind me are called limbers. The limber was a significant part of the battery. You generally had two men standing back here guarding the limber because that was all of your ammunition. All the ordnance that would be fired was kept in these boxes. They were not 100% waterproof, but they were pretty good. They had a copper top. Notice there's not any exposed nails. If there were, they were puttied in and usually painted. The box was walnut, and of course the copper lid helped protect it, and it overhung the sides in case of really, being in the rain in the field all the time. Behind here, generally about 50 to 60 yards, were the teams, the horse holders, because you had to have horse teams, usually 4 to 6 horses, that pulled these limbers back and set them in place. So you had other men that were part of the battery that were called horse holders, and their job was very key. If something happened and the horses were captured or they spooked and they left, if you were overran, you weren't going to be able to remove the cannon off of the field. And in some cases in the Civil War, they were captured because of that. So they would regularly practice shooting the cannons around the horses to break the horse, which meant to allow the horse to be able to stay in place and take the noise that was going off from these guns. The crews that you see here, we're close to what it would have resembled. We have 7-man crews today, meaning that's how many men it took actually to operate one particular gun in the section. So what you're looking at here, the two cannons represent what's called a section of a battery. A battery was 4. It started out in the war as 6 guns. As the war continued, about 1863, a battery meant 4 guns. And a section leader, which was usually the rank of a lieutenant, was in control of that battery. Now, a ranking NCO is generally in charge of a section. There were many cases, though, however, a second or first lieutenant, like we have today here with Mr. White, would be in control of giving the commands of the type of ordnance that would come up, generally also the elevation, and also the range and what their targets were. So he was instructional about where the shots were going to be fired. This was very important at Johnsonville because since this was an artillery battle taking place across a river that was 300 yards wide, they had to really be on the top of their math that day and understand what distance they were going to be firing these. The cannons here that you see in front of us have a very good range of almost up to a mile. So they could fire that projectile a mile. We're talking about a battle here that was fought over about 350 yards. So you can imagine how that affected. Okay, Bill, I'm going to hand you over the microphone and let you kind of explain to them what the round looked like and how it was fired. There you go.
When you think about cannons, most of the time we think about cannonballs. But a rifled gun, which these represent, 10-pound Parrots were rifled guns, which means it has grooves inside the barrel, causing the projectile to spin as it comes out. This is one of the projectiles that would have been shot in these particular weapons. This could also be shot out of a 3-inch ordnance gun because it has the same bore diameter. This one in particular has a little bell in the back, so when the explosion happens behind it, the bell expands, goes into the grooves of the rifling. The grooves turn as they come out, so it causes this to spin like a football, gets you a good spiral, which makes it accurate up to a mile. If we elevate, we can get more range out of it, but start losing accuracy. Remember, field artillery only shot at what they could see. They didn't use spotters like they do now. They only shot at what they could see because they thought that was a waste of ammunition. Siege weapons and that kind of thing would lob things into a town or into a fortified situation. Most of the time, field artillery wouldn't do that. They thought it was a waste of ammunition. When infantry and cavalry get close, we change to this. Now that is an exploding round. We can set a fuse and make it go off overhead of troops, or after it goes inside of something or whatever. We can put a percussion type or a timed fuse on it, a screw-in type or a paper type fuse that would cause those to go off. This is what we'd use 700 yards and closer. We would use these against great big swaths of men or cavalry or whatever we need. If we need to take down a whole bunch of trees and bushes, we just clear stuff out with this. Anywhere between 75 and 150 little balls inside a canister round turns these guns into great big shotguns. Very, very devastating weapon. The artillery barrage that happened here, imagine stuff like this and that, and the shells going off. It's not just the balls that come across or the projectiles that come across, but when they get there, if the gunners have the range right, they will explode when they get to their target. So very, very devastating weapon. Very lots of just stuff flying everywhere when these are going off. So you imagine not just two guns in a section that we have here, but imagine a whole line of guns firing from different positions and firing on each other and firing on the gunboats that were here and the ships that were here on the river. We're gonna load and fire this section for you, and as you watch the guys load and load the weapons, a rifleman would load and do all these steps himself on his weapon. These being a lot bigger weapons, we have to have a bunch of our buddies to help us. So, as Jerry said, we have a crew somewhere around eight men normally for a cannon. We can actually go down to two. The manual says you can go down to two, but you got to have at least two, one to work front and back.
Never mind.
And the problem with that is you're having to do 2 or 3 people's job. So a good crew can fire as fast as a rifleman can load his rifle, which is like 3 times a minute. So you can imagine shooting those canister rounds 3 times a minute, 75 to 150 little balls in each cannon, and a whole battery of guns there. It'd be very devastating to an advancing infantry unit to come up on a battery of guns.
Ready to shoot?
And once again, I want to remind everybody that during the demonstration, please, no lighting up of cigarettes. We're standing here with a lot of black powder, 50 pounds each, so we don't want to brighten up anybody's day any more than it is, right? And also, once again, we have to keep, by law, we have to keep a 12-foot safety line right here. So anybody that's here over, please come back in this direction. And we have to keep this distance between you all as a safety mechanism and the limber. So if y'all wouldn't mind, please stepping back, and we'll start our program. Alex, if you wouldn't mind helping us as our safety officer, I'd appreciate it.
After we get through firing and the guns are cleared, then I'll give you the okay to move in, and you can take pictures and go ask questions and that kind of thing. But please remember, don't smoke up here, okay? Very, very important that we don't have a fire. We will go through all the steps it takes to load and fire the weapons. And when we go to fire, you can hold your ears if you'd like. But remember, this is a half of a round. If we were shooting a true projectile, we'd use a full pound of powder, and this is just half. So we kind of tend to go it down because we get enough, you'll understand, we get enough bang and we get enough smoke. Cannoneers, post! Load, down, 1,800 yards. Load. These are muzzle loading weapons, so they have to be loaded from the muzzle. Therefore, that man in the front, which is the number 1 man, uses a rammer to ram the charge all the way back. Number 3 man will puncture the charge on the command ready to open up the bag to the primer. A primer is a little brass tube that has a wire going inside of it. It is coated like a match head has. It's called a friction primer. That's what they used during the war, and that's what we use. When it's jerked out with the lanyard, it will strike like a match does with a little bit of black powder inside of it. Shooting flame down into the exposed powder causes it to blow up. We're going to wait on these vehicles. We had a man that owned a 3-inch ordnance gun that fired one off his truck, and it sucked the windshield out of his truck and slammed it down on the ground. He told me in an email that it was the most expensive shot he's ever fired. It was a hoot. So we're going to try not to do that to someone else's vehicle.
They need to go on.
They'll go, they shoot.
Yeah, they
won't
go
hurt.
up.
Move them or not?
We'll be good. Are you okay, sir?
We're gonna see.
Very good. If there's a rodeo, y'all just stay put. The horses won't run over you on purpose.
Big deal.
Section fire on my command. Ready? Fire! Now, if you'll stay right where you're at, the crews will clean their guns and make sure that they're safe for you to advance. Once they give us the gunners give us the sign that they are clear, then I'll let you go down and you can take pictures and ask questions and that kind of thing. Anybody have any questions while we wait on them to do their job? Any questions?
How much do those guns weigh?
About 2,000 pounds with the carriage. The tube's about 1,000 and the carriage is about 1,000.
How many rounds would they last before something goes wrong?
Well, now the Parrots are cast guns. They were cast guns back then, and in rifling. So you know if you have a piece of cast and you groove it and then you hit it with a hammer, eventually they break. But they were probably good to around 2,000 rounds, 2,000, 3,000 rounds. 100-pound Parrot in South Carolina, there was an account of the end breaking off. They filed down the sharp edges because it was in battle. They filed down the sharp edges and continued to fire. That 100-pound Parrot means it shoots a 100-pound round. They said they shot 200 more rounds with very little loss of accuracy. And then they noticed a crack coming into the barrel, so then they shut it down, moved it back, and take it to the foundry so they could melt it down and pour